My name is Helen Tran. I'm 63 years old, and I taught fourth grade for 31 years at the same elementary school in Sacramento, California. I know every crack in that linoleum floor. I know the smell of chalk dust and the particular way afternoon light comes through the classroom windows in October. I gave that school everything I had, and when I retired, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. I was wrong. My husband Robert passed away from a heart attack in the spring of 2019, 11 days after our 34th wedding anniversary. He was in the garage working on a cabinet he'd been building for our daughter's kitchen. He'd been talking about that cabinet for months. The kind of wood he wanted, the hardware, the finish. He never got to deliver it. After he died, I had the house, his life insurance, and 31 years of a teacher's pension. I also had our daughter, Melissa. She was 31 at the time, married to a man named Kevin, living about 40 minutes away in Roseville. They had a son, my grandson Tyler, who was 4 years old and the only person in the world who could make me laugh that first year after Robert died. I want to tell you about the years between then and now, because when I try to explain what happened to people, they always ask me the same thing. They say, "Why did you keep helping them?" And the honest answer is that I didn't understand what was happening while it was happening. You never do. It's only when you're standing outside in the cold, looking through a window at a table full of people who used to love you, that things become clear. It started 3 months after Robert's funeral. Kevin had an opportunity, Melissa said. A franchise. A small smoothie and juice bar concept that was expanding into the Sacramento suburbs. The numbers looked good, she said. They just needed startup capital to cover the franchise fee and first-year operating costs, $42,000. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the paperwork they brought over. Robert's reading glasses were still on the counter. I hadn't moved them. I looked at the numbers and I thought about how Robert had always handled the finances, how he would have known what questions to ask, and I felt so completely alone in that moment that I said yes, just to feel like I was still connected to something. I told myself it was an investment in my family's future. I told myself Tyler would benefit. I wrote the check. The smoothie bar opened. For about 8 months, it seemed fine. Melissa would send me photos of the store, Tyler sitting on the counter with a fruit cup. I visited twice. Kevin seemed proud, walking me around the place, explaining the equipment. I was glad I'd helped. Then the problem started. The location wasn't as high traffic as they'd projected. A competing juice concept opened 2 miles away. They needed updated equipment. They needed help covering payroll during slow months. Each request came with a reasonable explanation and a promise that things were about to turn around. Over 22 months, I gave them another $68,000. I want you to understand something. I am not a wealthy woman. I was a public school teacher in California. What I had came from 3 decades of careful saving, Robert's life insurance, and selling the house we'd lived in for 22 years because it was too big for just me. I downsized to a too big for just me. I told myself it was the right thing to do anyway. I told myself I didn't need all that space. But the real reason I sold the house was to have liquidity. And most of that liquidity went to Melissa and Kevin. Whenever I tried to slow down to ask about repayment, the conversation would shift. Melissa would get quiet in a way that worried me. She'd stop calling as frequently. Kevin would make comments about how they were doing their best, how it was hard enough without feeling judged, and then several days would pass without a word from them, and I'd miss Tyler so desperately that I'd find a reason to reach out, and somehow we'd end up back at the table with another request. I know how this sounds. I do. But if you have ever loved a grandchild, you understand how that love can be used against you. Not consciously, perhaps. Maybe Melissa didn't even realize she was doing it. But every time I pulled back, Tyler was the wall they put between us. The franchise closed in the fall of 2022. Kevin said the market had shifted. Melissa said they'd learned a lot. Neither of them mentioned the $110,000 I had given them. Not once. Not in terms of repayment. Not even in terms of acknowledgement. Within 2 months of the closure, Kevin had a new plan. Real estate. He'd gotten his license. He just needed help covering their expenses while he built his client base, because the first 6 to 12 months in real estate were notoriously unstable. Could I help with the mortgage? Just for a few months. I gave them $14,000 over the next 7 months. By the spring of 2023, I had given my daughter and son-in-law a total of approximately $124,000. Most of it was gone. None of it had been repaid. I had about $60,000 left in savings, a modest monthly pension, and a condo I owned outright. That April, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Manageable, the doctor said, but I needed to take it seriously. I needed to reduce stress. I needed consistent sleep, dietary changes, regular monitoring. Some of the medications I'd need were expensive, and my insurance covered them partially, but not completely. I sat in the car after that appointment for a long time. I did the math in my head. The math that Robert would have done immediately, automatically, the way he always did. I thought about the number in my savings account. I thought about what $60,000 looked like when you're 62 years old with a chronic health condition and no one to lean on. I called Melissa from the parking lot. I told her about the diagnosis. She said, "Oh, Mom, that's really scary." She said she'd call me later that week. She asked if I was okay to drive home. She did not ask if I needed anything. She did not mention money. She called on Thursday, and we talked for 12 minutes, mostly about Tyler's soccer schedule. I don't say this to make her sound like a monster. I say it because I kept waiting for her to ask. I kept thinking, surely she's going to bring it up. Surely she's doing the math the same way I am. Surely she knows. She never brought it up. Kevin's real estate career was slow to get going. The requests didn't stop, but they became smaller, more casual. Gas money. Help with Tyler's summer camp. Could I take on their car insurance payment for a few months while they stabilized? Each thing individually seemed minor. Together they added up to another $11,000 over the course of about 8 months. By January of 2024, I was down to $41,000 in savings, taking 3 medications daily and feeling the kind of tired that isn't about sleep. It's the tired that comes from pretending, from performing normalcy while something is hollowing you out from the inside. I had a friend named Opal. We'd taught together for 15 years, and she'd retired 2 years before me. Opal is the kind of person who says the thing that needs to be said without cruelty but without hesitation either. One afternoon she came over and I made coffee, and I found myself telling her everything, every number, every phone call, every time I'd said yes when I knew I should say no. When I finished, Opal put down her mug and said, "Helen, they know exactly what they're doing." I said I didn't think Melissa was doing it on purpose. Opal said, "Maybe not, but she's letting it happen, and that is a choice." I thought about that for weeks. The invitation came in early March. Melissa called to tell me about a dinner she and Kevin were hosting. A family gathering, she said, for Kevin's side. His parents, his sister and her husband, his uncle who was visiting from Phoenix. She said it in a light, chatty way, like she was just keeping me informed, and I understood that I was not being invited, but that she expected me to receive this information graciously. I asked, "Is Tyler going to be there?" She said yes. I said, "I'd love to see him. Maybe I could stop by before dinner just to give him a quick hug." There was a pause. She said she'd check with Kevin. She never called back about it. On the evening of the dinner, I drove over anyway. I know that already sounds like a mistake, and you're probably right. But I had a card for Tyler and a small gift, a book about dinosaurs he'd asked me about the last time I'd seen him, and I told myself I would simply drop it off, see my grandson for 5 minutes, and leave. I wasn't trying to crash anything, I just missed him. I rang the doorbell. Kevin answered. I could see past him into the dining room. The table was set for 10 or 12 people. There were flowers on the table. Someone was laughing in the kitchen. Tyler was sitting in a booster seat at the corner of the table, and when he saw me, he said, "Grandma," and started to climb down. Kevin stepped onto the porch and pulled the door mostly shut behind him. He said, "Helen, tonight's not really a good time." I said I was just dropping something off for Tyler. He said, "This is a family dinner. It's Kevin's family only." He corrected himself quickly. "My family. It's my family's dinner. I'm sorry, it's just not a great night." I stood there for a moment. I could hear Tyler inside asking where I'd gone. I handed Kevin the card and the book, and I said, "Please give these to him." Kevin took them without looking at me. He said, "We'll talk soon, okay?" and went back inside. I walked to my car. I sat there in the dark for a while, listening to the sound of music and voices coming from inside the house. At some point, I heard Tyler laugh. That specific laugh he has, the one that sounds like he can't quite contain it, and something in my chest broke open that I haven't fully been able to close. I drove home. I didn't sleep that night. I thought about every check I'd written. I thought about the cabinet Robert never got to finish. I thought about the 2-bedroom condo I'd bought because I thought I was investing in my family's future. I thought about $41,000 and 3 medications a day and a diagnosis I'd received in a parking lot after a call my daughter had let slip away in 12 minutes. I thought about Opal saying, "She's letting it happen, and that is a choice." In the morning, I called my bank. I spoke to a financial advisor there, a woman named Joyce who had helped me set up my accounts after Robert died. I explained my situation. Joyce did not tell me what to do. She helped me understand clearly and completely what my options were and what my finances looked like, and she asked me questions about my goals and what I needed to feel secure at my age with my health condition. What she said, very gently, was, "At your current rate of outflow and your savings level, you are not financially safe." I had already known that. But hearing it from someone else, someone with numbers in front of her, made it real in a different way. I called Melissa that same afternoon. I told her that I was stopping all financial support, effective immediately. I told her this was not a negotiation and not something I was willing to discuss at length. I told her I loved her and I loved Tyler and I hoped things would go well for her and Kevin, but that I could no longer give them money in any amount for any reason. Melissa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This is because of the dinner, isn't it?" I said it was because of 31 years of teaching and a house I sold and a diagnosis I received alone in a parking lot. She started to say something about how they were doing their best, about how Kevin's real estate work was finally picking up, about how she hadn't realized how much all of this had affected me. I said, "I know, I'm gonna go now." And I hung up. The next 2 months were the quietest of my life since Robert died. Melissa called twice. Both times she talked about Tyler, about how much he missed me, about how he asked for me. It was not lost on me that the child had become, perhaps without anyone fully intending it, the primary instrument of leverage. I said I would love to see Tyler and that she and I could arrange that separately from any financial conversations. She didn't respond to that directly. Kevin called once. He said he understood I was going through a hard time and that he hoped I knew how much they appreciated everything I'd done. He said he wanted me to know they planned to pay me back eventually. He did not ask what I needed. He did not ask what I needed. He did not ask about my health. The call lasted 4 minutes. In May, Melissa texted me, "The salon is having some financial problems. We might lose our lease if we can't cover 2 months back rent. Kevin's commissions have been inconsistent. Mum, I know you said you couldn't help, but I'm asking you to reconsider. Tyler cries for you." I read that text sitting on my porch with a cup of tea. A neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. The roses I'd planted along the fence were starting to bloom, the pale yellow ones Robert had always liked. I read the text 3 times. I put my phone face down on the chair beside me. I thought about Opal. I called her. She picked up on the second ring. I read her the text. When I finished, Opal was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to see Tyler." She said, "That's separate. You can do that." I said, "I know." Then I said, "I'm not going to send money." Opal said, "I know you're not." I put my phone down and watched the roses for a while. Robert had planted those. He'd driven 45 minutes to a specialty nursery to find that exact variety because I'd mentioned once, years ago, that pale yellow roses were my favorite. He'd never mentioned the trip. He'd just come home one Saturday with a flat of bare root plants and spent the afternoon in the dirt. That's who I was trying to honor when I kept writing those checks. I thought I was being like Robert, generous, quiet, showing love through action. But Robert never gave in ways that emptied him. He gave from fullness, from intention, from a place of genuine abundance. What I had been doing was different. I had been giving out of fear of being cut off, fear of losing access to my grandson, fear of being the mother who said no, the grandmother who wasn't there. I called Melissa back the following morning. I told her I would not be sending money, but that I would like to take Tyler to the park on Saturday, just the two of us, if she was willing to arrange that. I told her I loved her and that door was not closed. She said she'd think about it. On Thursday, she texted me Tyler's address and said he'd be ready at 10. I picked him up on Saturday morning. He ran to the car in his sneakers with the Velcro straps, carrying a small backpack shaped like a turtle, and he talked for the entire 15-minute drive about his friend Marcus at school, and a video game he wanted and whether or not snakes could swim. I held on to every single word. We spent 3 hours at the park. I pushed him on the swings until my shoulders ached and I did not care even slightly. We fed ducks. He told me a joke that didn't make any sense and laughed at it so hard he fell off the bench. I laughed too. Driving him home, he said, "Grandma, why don't you come to our house anymore?" I said, "We'll figure that out, sweetheart." He said, "Okay," with complete confidence, the way children accept things when they trust you, and I kept my eyes on the road and breathed through it. I dropped him off. Melissa met me at the door. She looked tired. We didn't talk much. She thanked me for taking him. I said, "Of course." We stood there for a moment in that particular awkwardness of two people who love each other and have hurt each other and don't know yet what comes next. As I was turning to go, she said, "Mom." I turned back. She said, "I'm sorry about the dinner." I nodded. I said, "I know." I walked back to my car. I didn't cry until I was back on the freeway, and then I let myself. Not from sadness exactly, or not only from sadness. From the strange relief of finally standing on solid ground after years of not being sure where the earth was. I still see Tyler every other Saturday. Melissa and I are rebuilding something, slowly. Kevin and I are polite in the way that people are polite when they've run out of other options. The salon closed in June. I don't know what their finances look like now, and that is, for the first time in years, genuinely not my problem. My diabetes is managed, my savings are recovering. I started going to a book club at the library on Tuesday evenings, something I'd wanted to do for years, but had always felt too busy, too tired, too tethered to say yes to. Last Tuesday, a woman in the book club asked me what I'd learned from the book we were reading, which was about a woman starting her life over at 60. I thought about it for a minute. I said, "I think I've learned that saying no to someone you love is not the same as abandoning them." The woman across the table from me nodded slowly. She said, "That's a hard lesson." I said, "Yes, but I think it's the one I needed." Robert's glasses are still on the counter. I've decided they can stay. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect, not in any grand philosophical sense. Just the plain, ordinary way that what we do keeps moving forward long after we think the moment is over. I gave Melissa and Kevin money because I was afraid. I told myself it was love, and love was part of it, but underneath the love was fear. Fear that if I said no, I would lose her. Fear that if I set a limit, she would stop calling. Fear that Tyler would grow up not knowing me. I kept writing checks to keep a door open that should have been open anyway, that never should have required payment to begin with. And here is what I understand now. When you give from fear, you don't actually buy what you're afraid of losing. You just postpone the moment of truth. All those years of saying yes, all that money, all those months of watching my savings shrink while I told myself things would get better. None of it bought me what I wanted. It bought me delayed consequences. The dinner still happened. Kevin still stepped onto that porch and said the words he said. The door still mostly closed. The fear I'd been trying to outrun caught up with me anyway, and I had less left to face it with. That's the thing about avoiding hard truths. They don't go away. They just wait. What changed things wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a perfect conversation. It was a Tuesday morning in a bank parking lot after a doctor's appointment, sitting alone with a number in my head and finally letting myself see it clearly. I had given away my security. Not because I was foolish, I'm not a foolish woman, but because I had confused love with the inability to disappoint someone. Opal told me that Melissa was letting it happen, and that was a choice. I resisted that for a while because it was easier to believe my daughter was simply unaware. But awareness is also a choice. People know most of the time. They know when they're taking more than is fair. They know when they haven't asked how you're doing in weeks. They know when the only time they reach out is when they need something. Melissa knew. Kevin knew. And I knew too. I just kept choosing not to act on what I knew. The moment I stopped, something shifted. Not immediately in my relationship with Melissa, but in myself. I felt the ground under me again. I stopped waking up at 3 a.m. doing math. I stopped rehearsing conversations that were never going to go the way I hoped. I stopped waiting to be seen by people who had stopped looking. Tyler is the reason I stay patient. He is not responsible for any of this, and he never will be. The Tuesday mornings at the park, the Velcro sneakers, the jokes that don't make sense, that is what I was actually protecting all along. Not by giving money, by staying intact enough to still be there. I think about Robert's roses sometimes. He drove 45 minutes to find exactly the right ones because I'd mentioned once that I liked pale yellow. He never said a word about the trip. He just came home and planted them. That's what real love looks like. Quiet, specific, not looking for acknowledgement. It doesn't deplete you. It comes from somewhere solid. I'm trying to be that solid again, for Tyler, for myself, for the woman who still has things worth protecting.